Sasha Martinengo.
Storming down the pit lane.
Weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m. Central African Time. On balls.co.za.
Yesterday, of course, was the British Grand Prix. And what a race it was. I tell you, if you missed it, try and get a rerun. Do yourself a favor and just watch this race, because it just was spectacular. It was so exciting. There was so much action that took place during the course of the nearly 2 hours of the race. But you got to go back to Friday, because remember, we were on Friday, and we had rain sessions for free practice in free practice 1 and free practice 2 on Friday, and it was very, very difficult to call out or to analyze, to get some kind of idea as who actually had some speed. Then on Saturday morning, free practice 3 was a dry session. So we had a bit of running with the cars in the dry conditions, and then you sort of got to try and put Friday and Saturday together, and you could see that there were certain cars that were good in all conditions. One of them was the Ferrari, the other one was the Red Bull. Another team that weren't expected to be very, very quick this weekend was McLaren, as well as Mercedes, as well as Lotus. Then we got into qualifying at Saturday afternoon, and then we had this downpour of rain in qualifying 2, and the session was actually stopped. And it was stopped, and one could say for the right reasons, of course, because of safety. A lot of people don't realize that driving in torrential rain in those kind of cars that disperse so much water from the wheels makes visibility zero. And just out of safety, the session was stopped. We waited for over an hour, and then eventually the session came back on. And guys like Schumacher, Alonso, Massa, I think Vettel was outside the top 10 as well, got a bit of a lucky break, one has to say, and got themselves into Q3, and eventually by 0.04 of a second, Fernando Alonso claimed pole over Mark Webber. Third was Michael Schumacher. And then, of course, we were waiting to see what the weather was going to do yesterday on race day. There was prediction that there was going to be more rain. Now, once cars have finished in their qualifying, they go into what you call a parc fermé situation. From all of the cars are not allowed to be tampered with at all or touched by the teams until roughly 3 hours or 2.5 hours before race day, before the race day. So those cars are all now set up by the engineers for what they presume are going to be the conditions they can expect on race day. Sunday came out, and during the course of the morning we had a GP3 race, which started off in damp conditions, eventually got dry, and then of course we had the GP2 race, which was dry, and then the sun basically came out, and we had a glorious afternoon. No rain whatsoever for the Formula 1 race yesterday afternoon. Because of changing climate conditions and the way that Formula 1 works, if you qualify in wet conditions and the following day's dry conditions, you have the option to choose which compound tire you want to use in terms of the slicks. And it was only Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso out of the top 10 that decided to go on what was the harder compound tire in the first stint. The rest of the drivers all decided to go on the softer compound. So Alonso got away, Webber was right behind him, Schumacher was doing quite well, Massa had a terrific start, and we had this jostling for position all the way through the race. Romain Grosjean unfortunately got tapped right in the beginning of the race, went back into the pits, came out last. By this stage, unfortunately, Paul di Resta also had a coming together, rear tyre got flattened, and he was out of the race. So Romain Grosjean was last, and in a Lotus that was incredibly quick, and eventually managed to push himself all the way up to 6th position, which just showed you that that car did have the pace in the hands of Romain Grosjean. Even though his teammate Raikkonen finished ahead of him, one has to understand that Grosjean made one extra pit stop and had to drive through the whole field to finish 6th, ahead of the likes of Schumacher, Hamilton, Senna and Button. But up front, it was all about Fernando Alonso and Mark Webber, and Fernando Alonso pulled out a relatively decent gap on Mark Webber through the first stop. Then it came to the first set of pit stops, and Mark Webber decided to go onto the harder compound tire. Fernando Alonso also decided to go onto the harder compound tire. But because Webber had started on the softer compound tire, he now in his last stint, had the option of going either soft or hard, whereas Fernando Alonso was forced, because of the regulations, to go on to the softer compound tyres. Behind them, there was some great racing. Lewis Hamilton had fought himself up beautifully through the field in his harder compound tyres. Then he went on a very short stint on the soft compound tyres and came in, and he had about 25 laps to go still, and his team put him back onto the harder compound tyres. However, it was a bit of a mistake, because we had noticed that any of the teams, once they got to about 18 or 19 laps on the harder compound tyres, then, and we've mentioned it many times before on the show, the tyres start hitting the cliff and then they start falling down. And because of that, all of a sudden you lose huge amounts of time and you get swallowed up by all of the drivers behind you. We saw amazing moves by Romain Grosjean coming past Hamilton, coming past Rosberg. Some brilliant driving. We had one, well, not so kosher incident, featuring yet again, and I hate to say it, Pastor Maldonado. Pastor Maldonado and Sergio Perez both came out of the pit lane together, both on the harder compound tyres. The tyres were cold. They were jostling for position. The Sauber of Perez seemed to have the much better grip, tried to get on the inside, on the outside of Pastor Maldonado. Maldonado went straight into him, took him out, and Perez unfortunately was out of the race, which was very unfortunate, because I think the Saubers had a good chance of scoring some very good points. Maldonado got another $10,000 euro fine, which I thought got off quite luckily. The problem is that Pastor Maldonado is making this now a weekly or bi-weekly every race meeting kind of event. He took out Hamilton in Valencia, and now took out Perez in Silverstone. I think the team are going to get slightly annoyed with them. Besides that, the rest of the driving was incredibly fast. Silverstone, one of the fastest circuits on the Formula One calendar, and some really great driving by all of the drivers, some great overtaking as well. As we got towards the end of the second stint, the drivers went in for their third pit stops. Webber came out about 5 seconds, 5.5 seconds behind Alonso, and they had 15 laps to go. The problem was Alonso was on the softer compound tyres, which weren't the sort of ideal tyre to be on. Webber was on the harder compound tyre, and with 5 laps to go, Webber and Alonso fighting for position. Webber managed to get past the Ferrari of Fernando Alonso and basically stormed away to victory. Sebastian Vettel had raced well to get up to third position, and Felipe Massa, I think, drove a very strong race as Alonso's teammate, finishing in 4th place. So a very good points haul for the likes of Ferrari, but an equally brilliant points haul for Red Bull, and they now lead that Constructors' Championship by, well, by like 1 billion points. Good points for Raikkonen and Grosjean. However, I do believe if Grosjean didn't have the problems in the beginning, he would have been right up there. Got to say, he is quicker than Kimi Raikkonen at present. Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg in the Mercedes. Well, Rosberg just had a disastrous weekend. Couldn't find any speed in that car. Michael Schumacher just has a problem with that Mercedes, and that is when it's on full fuel tanks, the car is just a handful. It's really difficult. It's got no pace, no speed. And I mean, from going from 3rd to 7th, unfortunately 7th was, I think, the best that they would have been able to do. Lewis Hamilton had a great race, but eventually his tyres gave in and finished in 8th place. Bruno Senna finished in 9th for Williams. I think it was his best drive so far of the season, but the Williams has the potential to challenge up higher, and Williams definitely need a #1 driver within that team. If they're going to hold on to Maldonado, they've got to calm this guy down and make sure that he races quicker. And with Senna, he just needs to be able to learn how to drive that car a lot faster. Jenson Button got into the points, starting in 16th place, finished in 10th, but it was a dismal weekend for McLaren. They were way off the pace on a circuit that I think everybody expected the McLarens to be very quick. Up front, Mark Webber now is only 13 points behind Fernando Alonso in the championship. Not a lot of people talking about Mark Webber, but at the moment he's 16 points ahead of his teammate and 13 behind Fernando Alonso. So what about Webber for the championship? He's been consistent. He's won 2 races now, the same as Alonso, and it seems as though they're definitely fighting for the championship. The other driver, of course, will be Vettel in the hunt, and you've got to watch out, of course, for Lewis Hamilton, but they're going to have to improve that McLaren car, especially when it comes to Germany in 2 weeks' time, which is also another very quick race. It was a brilliant British Grand Prix. Only one thing at the end which I found a little bit strange on the podium, as we have been accustomed to for, I don't know, for the last 50 odd years. The drivers get handed their trophies, which is always great, but then Sir Jackie Stewart decided to do an interview with all of the drivers, which I found a little bit peculiar, and that basically was the post-race press conference. So as much as it was innovative, unfortunately it wasn't really what I think the rest of us wanted to see. For the rest, a bad day for Sauber. I think they should have had at least a car in the points. And also for Force India, Nico Hulkenberg was doing really well, and then the last lap unfortunately ran wide and lost a whole bunch of positions to Button and Kobayashi. So not a great weekend for Force India, not a great weekend for Sauber either. One has to say, not a great weekend for McLaren. 2 weeks time we're in Germany, and then of course we have a week straight after that, and then the whole of August we are off for the summer holidays for the Formula One team. So the next 2 races going to be critical in the championships. Expect a lot of updates from the cars, and hopefully consistency from those in the front runners. They're going to have to maximize on points as much as possible. As I mentioned right at the beginning, if you missed it, try and watch it. It was a real classic.
Gears on bulls.co.za with Sasha Martinengo.
He's kept himself out of trouble.
Weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m. Central African Time.